Welcome to Bigfoot Society. If you have Bigfoot activity to report from the same areas discussed in this episode, please reach out to me directly after this episode. And if you'd like to be on the podcast to discuss a personal Bigfoot encounter, please reach out to me directly at bigfootsociety@gmail.com. Do you wish there was more Bigfoot Society to listen to every week? Well, there is now. If you become a supporting member over at Patreon, you get a special members-only episode every single week on Wednesdays, and sometimes even more episodes. Head on over to patreon.com/The Bigfoot Society. And now let's get on with the show. All right, Bigfoot Society, we have the privilege of talking to Dusty. Today, Dusty is an individual that reached out to me about some incidents that he's had in Pennsylvania. And we're able to set him up to come on the show and to share those. But Dusty, thank you for reaching out. And how's it going today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You know, I think we have quite the road to cover, and this is going to be a conversation that I'll be talking through as well. Sometimes we have episodes like that, which is awesome. I enjoy when we have a conversation back and forth. But Dusty, I'm going to let you go ahead and
definitely
take the reins for the beginning and take us back to when you first started having some interactions with Bigfoot.
All right. Well, I have always had some weird happenings. We had camped around the Michaux State Forest area. When I was younger, we used to do a lot of camping trips and stuff. And one of the places we would camp at was Howler Rock, which is actually in Caledonia, part of the state forest, right off the Appalachian Trail. And our family would always get like the secluded area, like way back in the edge of the campground, part of the forest area, like more. We would always I would always find myself having like strange happenings, like little weird noises and stuff at night while everybody else is, tucked away, sleeping or what have you. I'd just be sitting at the campfire and stuff. And sometimes we would have like pebbles thrown, like little tiny rocks and stuff. And I'd be like, is that my cousins playing tricks on me? And then I'd be like, oh, they're sleeping. So it wasn't that at all. So I didn't really, I grew up and heard stories, and, you watch out for the hide behinds and, the creatures in the forest, don't go whistling in the forest and stuff like that. Don't go by yourself. Always let people know where you're at. Stuff like that. And I guess a lot of that was for, abductions and stuff too. Not necessarily for Bigfoot, but any kind of abductions. There's some weirdos out there. But I always made a joke. About 2010, 2011-ish, I had moved up to that area. And I had like a 4-acre lot that was tucked up against the corner of the woods, and all that woods that wasn't mine was all state forest. When I had moved up there, very first time I went up into those woods actually is when I had a encounter, like an actual sighting. It was very weird. I just went up, we just moved in. I was like, I want to go check the lay of the land. I had one son already, and my fiance at the time was pregnant with my second son. And I've always been into hunting and fishing, always been outdoorsy. I grew up on a farm. So I went up, and I'm looking at trails, looking for signs for deer and whatever kind of wildlife may have been up there. And I noticed that a little bit after my property line into the woods, there's like an old logging road. So I was like, oh, check this out. I'm walking a little bit, and then walking around it, found all kinds of deer deer signs, scat, footprints, even some buck rubs. I was like, oh, nice. I moved into a nice hot spot. I guess nobody really hunted up here before. And as I'm walking around checking stuff, I just happened to look up and I saw something. I'm like, what the heck is this? This was like 40, 50 yards away, straight ahead of me. It was this, I feel it was like a adolescent Sasquatch. It felt like it was like a teenager by its appearance. It didn't look like it was old. It looked young. It was by itself. And it was doing this weird, like, hide behind, like, crouched down behind a fallen tree and a tree stump, and was like looking up and around, up and over, like you could see from its chest up, and it would crouch, like stayed crouching, but it would like peer up and look around. And I'm like, what the heck? So I guess it was like as surprised as me to see somebody up there. And I was like, what is that? That's not a bear. We don't have bears that color. It was, like I said, it was like an auburn, like a reddish brown. And I was like, this is weird. So I'm like looking around, like scanning the whole area, and I'm like, there's nobody out here but me. So as I'm scanning, I look up in its direction again, and it was closer. Now this time it was behind a big tree that was standing, and it was like 30 feet closer. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I didn't even hear it move, but it's closer. And I'm like thinking in my head, like, what the heck is this? What is going on? Like, I'm freaked out. I'm like all senses going, adrenaline pumping. And I'm like, and here it's like half of its body's like sticking out around the tree and kind of like doing this like lean out look. And then it would like slowly go back behind the tree and lean back out. And the wind was kind of blowing. So I noticed it was trying to mimic like how the wind, like mimic like it was flowing with the wind. And I'm like, wow, like completely blown out of my mind, but scared at the same time. So I'm like, I don't have the gun or anything on me. I don't even think I had a knife on me at the time. So I start looking around me. And I didn't want to like take my eyes off of it too much because of how much distance it had covered in like it was probably like 45 seconds worth of time, 30 to 45 seconds worth of time. So I'm scanning around me, and I see a stick, and I look up, and here it was even closer again. Now this time it's like, this thing's probably like 25 yards away now. And I'm like, I found a big limb that was like a stick that was laying, and it was like still hard. It wasn't rotted or anything. So my instinct was to grab this stick bend down, grab this stick while looking at it with my right hand. And there was a big tree next to me. So I was just went bang, whack, whack, like 3 or 4 times, and raised it up over my head and went, ah, and yelled. Well, I looked at the tree while I was hitting it. And when I raised up my stick and went, ah, it was gone. Like all I seen was tree branches wiggling. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, I was like all but frozen with fear because I've never encountered anything like that. I've witnessed black bears come through the campsite while we're camping. Never got this type of fear ever. And I'm like, where did it go? Like, I'm scanning the whole area. Now, mind you, my property is to my back. my house, in my yard. At the top of the hill, my yard was like a big hill that went to the wood line, and then the forest began. So I'm like about, I'd say 100 feet into the woods when this had happened. And I'm just scanning and looking all over the place. And there's no sign of anything being there except for those tree branches wiggling from where I saw it last. So I got down to the yard. I got out of the woods. I was like, this can't even be happening. Like, what is going on here? And as I'm walking through the yard into the house, I'm like, I'm never going in the woods without protection again. Like, this was scary. Now, it seemed like it was curious, not aggressive or anything like that. So I went in, and my fiance saw my face, and she's like, what's up with you? And I'm like, I don't even know. And I went up and grabbed my gun. I had a rifle, a high caliber rifle that I had grabbed, and my pistol. And on my pistol belt had a machete. So I put that on. I went up in the woods, and I was like, she's like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm not going in that woods without protection again. And do not let the kids play in the woods by themselves. Which I only had the one son at the time, and he was real little, but I was speaking in future reference, expecting to live there for longer than I did. I ended up just living there for about 5 years. But I went up. I didn't see any footprints or anything like that. It was kind of like a summer dry time of the year, so the ground was pretty hard. And where it wasn't hard, it was pretty spongy. It's kind of like 3 different types of terrains up there. You have like rocky, mountainous dirt, and then you have like a rainforest type of area, like climate area, where the ground's real spongy. It's just tree debris that is rotted into dirt. And to walk on it, it sponges and then lifts back up. It's like walking on a sponge, really. So I walked over looking for any kind of signs or whatever, and I'm like, well, I see a trail, like where something had moved through that, and I'm like looking. I'm walking around. But here I start following this trail, just being curious. I don't know why I decided to do this after this encounter. I guess my mind wouldn't let me let it rest until I've figured something out. So I'm walking, and I started finding these other areas where these trees were knocked down. And they were like laid on top of each other and stuff. And there was one that was like, it wasn't like they were like all uprooted. Some of them were snapped about 2 feet up from the base. And they were like crisscrossed and laying on top of each other. And I'm like, And this one, it was broke about 4 foot up from the ground. And now this one was probably about, I'd say, the width of a large coffee can. And I'm like, this is weird. I don't see any other trees in the area except for right in this little area where they'd fallen down. Like, so I'm looking around. I'm just like, well, maybe I can find some hair or something. I didn't end up finding any hair, but I did find stuff where like something ran over some of these trees and knocked the bark off. It was like fresh bark knocked off. And so I'm looking around that area, and something just, this weird noise happened. And then I heard another noise that was a little bit to the right of me, like at a diagonal, but up higher into the ridges. And I was like, this sounds like something's communicating. And that's when I was like, maybe that was the parents trying to ward me off and scare me off from chasing their young one. So I was up there for about an hour and a half at the most. The trail went cold, I felt, and all this stuff happening. I was like, all right, I think it's time to just head back to the house. But I never went in those woods again without at least a slug gun or a pistol and a slug gun. Even if I was cutting firewood, I wouldn't go up in those woods without anything. And there was times where I was up cutting firewood in the snow, standing dead and stuff, cutting to roll. I just cut it in lengths of like 8-10 feet and throw them up on my shoulder and walk them to the edge of the wood line and boop, boop, roll them down the hill into a pile. And then that was that instance.
Do you mind if I ask some questions real quick about what you just shared?
Go ahead.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Are you able to explain, or, you know, you mentioned it was some weird noises that you heard. Can you describe like what kind of noise it sounded like, or?
It sounded like a weird bird, but it didn't sound like a bird. Like it sounded like something trying to sound like a bird, but you could tell it wasn't a bird. And you could tell a difference in between the pitches and the tones of being different ones. Like, I guess it was like the mother and the father, I'm assuming. I'm not 100% sure. But I feel like that's what it was. Now it didn't it kind of sounded like a weird bird, almost like a like if some kid was trying, but an adult like didn't know how to make a crow sound, but trying to make a crow sound.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was it similar to any birds that you would have in the area?
No, I mean, there's plenty of crows around, but it wasn't a crow. You know, it was like, I don't. It's kind of hard to explain, really. Also, I heard like stuff moving way off in the distance, something big. Like it was almost like it was trying to head me off, but stay its own distance at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and then after it got real silent, and it felt like the trail went cold, that's when I headed back down.
When you had a view of it as it was starting to get, closer to you, do you remember what color hair it had on it?
Yeah, it was like a reddish brown, more red than brown. Okay. And it was real skinny and slender, and it was bigger than a person. Like, I'm 5'11", and this thing it looked like it was like 7 foot tall or more, judging from the branches. Because I checked out when I walked up there, I was like taking reference of the branches where it was standing near, and I'm like, these branches are like 7 foot high off the ground, like. And they were right near its like headline. And I'm like, this isn't a person in a suit or anything. Nobody playing tricks on me. Hey, let's mess with the new neighbor or nothing like that. But the face, it looked young. Because you could see its face, even at that distance. You could see its face. Like, it kind of looked like a man, but it didn't. And the height and the color of it, I was like, well, nobody would be using a ghillie suit like that to even be up in the woods, because it wouldn't really blend into anything. There's no dead pine trees around, like that would be the only instance where somebody would try and use that coloration on a ghillie suit or anything. And it was built like muscular build, but slender. And that's why I think it was as curious as I was, but maybe a little more curious.
Absolutely. Do you remember any certain details about the face that stood out? You had said that there were parts of it that didn't look like a man or a human. Do you remember what parts specifically made you think you're looking at something else?
Yeah, it was like a leathered like texture, but like an ash gray, like coloration to it. But it looked weathered, like for reference, if somebody works out in the sun a lot, how their face gets leather, like worn looking, to get extra wrinkles and stuff in their face. It looked like that, but it was gray, like ash gray. And it had a weird nose. Like, I call it like a spaded nose, or like a shovel shaped nose. It was kind of flatter than a normal, like, bridge of a nose. Like, it had a bridge, but it was the nostrils were flared more, like flatter, and it was like flared more. And
that's really interesting. Was there hair on the face at all?
No, not the face was completely bare. Okay. The hair was around it, all around it. And the fingers didn't have a lot of hair on them neither. I noticed that, because while it was like at the tree, you could see its hand on the side of the tree as it was like swaying in and out from behind the tree, trying to mimic the branches swaying in the wind and stuff. But then it was doing it offbeat from the wind as well. And that's what really made me catch on to it the first time, because it was like at a stump that was probably about waist height. And then there's like it was all rotty and stuff. So it kind of blended in with that coloration. But the fact that it was moving is what caught my eye. I was out scouting. So that's what, when I looked up and I saw it peek up and around while it was still crouched, it was kind of like hunkering down and then peeking up and around and hunkering down. And I never saw it like stand up. I just saw it move. Like, I saw it at one position, and then I scanned around, looked side, looked from around me, from left to right and back again. And then when I came back to pinpoint back onto it again, that's when I noticed it was closer.
During the time that you were able to get a look at it, did you notice it had any emotions to its face at all?
Yeah, it was surprised. And then it got to a point where when it was behind the tree standing, you could tell it had like a curious look on its face, like, what are they doing? Does he see me? He's looking at me. Does he see me? Like, kind of like a puzzled look. Puzzled and curious at the same time. And then when I grabbed the stick, I kept my eyes on it when I grabbed the stick. I bent down and grabbed it, and it like had like a expression like, whoa, what's he doing now? Like, yeah, those were the only couple of expressions that I'd noticed.
Was this the only interaction that you had with whatever was in the backwoods behind your house?
No. There was times where I was out hunting, and I did a lot of ground hunting because with it being part of the forest and stuff, I didn't really know at that time. I was pretty young, in my earlier 20s at that time, and I was like, I didn't really know what the laws were, like if I could put a tree stand up or anything, with it being like state forest or whatnot. So I was doing a lot more ground hunting. So I would follow trails and then find spots like logs or nice outcroppings to tuck into and sit. Sometimes there's like a whole thick rhododendron mountain laurel forest part aspect to it. That's like another climate of it. You get into that and it's real thick, like, but you see deer trails and stuff where it's like tunnels. So you're getting down and like crawling through these tunnels. And then there was a point where I was doing that, and then it was like a space in there where it was like, it blew my mind. I was like, something's been bedding down in here, but it doesn't look like deer. Like, deer could have been in there, but I didn't really see any sign of deer. I did find, while I was, before I crawled in through some of those tunnels, I did find some scat, and I just thought it off as like buck scat, because bucks, a difference between a buck's and a doe's poop. A buck, it'll be pellets, but it'll be clumped in like the shape of a turd. But this was in that shape, but it wasn't real pellety. Like, and the deer, they poop more scattered pellets, and the young ones will as well too. So I was like, huh, they must have ate something wet or something. It didn't really form into pellets. It just kind of came out like a turd. And then I'm like thinking to myself, well, usually if they eat something wet and it makes them founder, they usually get the runs instead of pooping anything solid at all. So I was kind of puzzled by that. But while I was in that clear, like matted down area inside there, I call it a clearing, but it was still enclosed above me like a canopy. So it was kind of like a cave inside this rhododendron forest. And I could hear stuff outside, and I'm like, oh, maybe I kicked some deer up. So I scurried on out, but I never saw any deer running. And all the noise I ever heard was always out of, like, at a distance, at least 20, 30 feet distant in the thick of the cover, behind cover. That was my first mountain house. I had another mountain house up in that area as well. That one I was at a lot longer, and I had a lot of strange stuff going on there. I had, I had a 4-acre lot there, with natural spring streams and runoff streams that would come down. And my house was kind of like in the corner of like a little field, and the rest was like all the forest and wooded. I had 4 acres or 4.5 acres, and what wasn't mine was all the state forest again. And this one, I had some stuff. I would get corn from a farmer at work, and I would put out in piles on the off season. I wouldn't bait deer to hunt over the pile or anything like that. I fed the squirrels and the turkeys because I like teaching my sons about this stuff too. I figured I'd pass on the legacy like my father had to me. When we were young, Gettysburg is pretty close to that area and where we grew up. So when we were young, we would get in like camouflage and go out to the battlefield, and because nobody would be able to hunt out on the battlefield. And that would be kind of like our training for hunting, is we would get all camoed out and see how close we could get to the herds of deer before they would get alerted and get spooked and run off. And it was actually something my dad did when he was younger too with my pappy. So he kind of passed it on to us, and it was like training in a sense. So there was times where some of the corn, it would be shelled corn, but there'd still be some that would still have like chunks of corn cob or some cob still there. And there'd be times where you'd notice it disappearing, and I'd go up, put some out, and then wait a week or two, and then go up and check it again. And all right, it's gone. I'll put some more out. So after about a year and a half or so of doing this, one time I put corn out, and I went up 2 days later because it was right behind. It was like a clearing behind my fire pit. I had like a 10-foot stone fire pit that I made, and we would have bonfires there. And on the front half of it, or the front third, like if you were to, it was 10 foot around. The front third of it, I would use for cooking. I work with woods, so I was like, heck, I work with all kinds of hardwoods and stuff. This is awesome. I can just cook on the pit. Actually, I would cook on that pit even when it was snow out. Sometimes I had a pathway shovel up there. I loved cooking on that thing. So I went up like 2 days later, and all the corn was gone. And there wasn't like no like little kernels, remnants laying behind or nothing. It was like something like ate it all and swept the area clean. It was all fresh dirt, like fresh. You could smell the fresh dirt. I'm like, what the heck? So I was like, all right, well, I got the other half of this bag. I'm going to go down and throw it out. So I did that. And this time I took a couple little tree limbs, like little twiggly limbs, and just like laid it on top of the corn, thinking like maybe this will slow them down a little bit or something. So I went up on the weekend, like a Saturday, and the little twiggly things were gone completely. It wasn't like it was just set off to the side or drug away or anything like that. I'm like, what the heck's going on here? Like, the squirrels ain't doing this, and the turkeys aren't doing this. And I can't really see the deer grabbing the tree limbs and putting them back into a brush pile or something. So I just went about my way and kept doing it. And then eventually I would put 2 corn cobs on top. And I just like lay them side by side and just set them on top. I'm like, all right, let's see what happens here. After about the 5th or 6th time of replenishing this, after it's been completely dusted away, like there wasn't even any like dust left over from the corn or anything. It was weird. So I came back, and all the corn was, I left it go for like 2 weeks, and I come back, and all the corn was gone, even the cobs. And I'm like, man, these things, they must be having a rough year if they're that hungry. They're eating the cobs too. So I filled it again on the 2-week mark, and then I put bigger limbs where it was like, I'd say about inch long at where they broke off of the tree, and stacked like a little bit of a brush like on top of it, thinking maybe it'll last a little longer. So I went back up 3 days later, and these limbs were literally like thrown. Like you can see where it was like thrown and then stuck. Like some of them would like dig in to the dirt a little bit where the heavy end was, the base, I guess you would call it. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Like, this is freaking weird. So I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm going to give them 2 weeks off, see how they like that. Maybe they'll appreciate it a little more or something, just thinking stupid stuff to myself. Because it was getting a little expensive. I was getting a bag of corn from the farmer. It was like 50 pounds for like $8 at the time. And I came back after I didn't actually go back after 2 weeks that time. I went back 3 weeks later. And there was 2 corn cobs placed in an X in the bare spot. And now, mind you, when I left the last time, there was nothing there whatsoever. And the limbs were laying it like stabbed into the dirt 20 feet away from where I stuck them, 10, 20 feet away from where I stuck them. Some were ever closer, some were farther, but it was like something walked over and just, like if I were to walk up to it and be like, and just reach down and chuck the limbs off to the side just to get the corn, and like, I'm like, what the heck's going on here? This ain't squirrels. Squirrel might be carrying a lot of this stuff back and hiding it or putting it in their nest, but they're not going to put these 2 corn cobs here in the middle like an X. I was like, I'm thinking back to my other encounters, and I'm like, they're literally asking me for more in my mind, seeing this. You know what I mean? Like, what does that in nature? A bear's not going to do that. A deer's not going to do that. And I'm pretty sure a squirrel's not going to do that either. So I had like a camp, a Boy Scouts like knapsack backpack, like a canvas backpack, and that's what I was feeding them with. I would fill it up, and it would hold about 15 pounds of corn, and I'd carry it up, and I'd dump it out. So I dumped it out. I put the 2 corn cobs back on top like an X again, and laid a big limb on top of it. Now, this is like a 20-foot limb that had branches coming off of the limb itself and everything. I went up 8 days later. The limb was tossed aside again. This time, the big part, the bottom or the base part of it, was stuck up in a tree limb, and the twiggly parts was down into this fallen tree that was back behind there, a fallen hemlock tree that had came down in a storm about a year beforehand. And all the corn was gone again, but those 2 corn cobs were stuck back in that spot, that bare spot, fresh soil showing in an X. And I'm like, get out of here. No way. Like, I can't even tell people about this. They're not going to believe this. Like, there's no way this is happening right now. So that went on for a good while. Pretty much until I got tired of this having corn disappear in a very fast amount of time. I had gotten some chickens from my dad before he had gotten sick. So I ended up with I had a couple myself, and then I got all of his. So I ended up with like 13 hens that were all laying chickens, egg-laying chickens. And so I was like, well, I need to spend money on chicken feed now instead of feeding the wildlife. So I went on with that and kind of gave that part up. But I would have some weird stuff happening to me while I was up hunting, too. There was one time, I gotta before I get into the hunting things. It was about a year or so, not quite half a year, but not quite a year. After I'd gotten the chickens, for some reason, my dog would go to the wall that was in between, like facing the chicken coop. It was a shed that I turned into a chicken coop and had a run. I fenced out around it and everything. Made a laying box for them and everything so they could go out. And I would let them wild range, free range, feed on bugs and stuff. I got a lot more eggs from them that way. Nice big ones too. Extra proteins and stuff. This was at like 12:30 at night. My dog went to that wall, hair standing up, growling, head down, like she was pointing, but in like defensive mode. And I'm like, what the heck? And I was like, trying to call her over. Callie, come here. She wouldn't come and respond to me. At one point, she looked at me like out of the side of her eye and went right, like stayed growling, and she didn't bark, but she growled like a vicious growl. And I was like, I have never heard her do that before in my life. She used to be like a sentry guard to my kids when they were babies. Like nobody would be able to go near the bassinet but me as a mother. But she never made that kind of noise. She would just, but she was viciously growling at the wall. And I'm like, what the heck? So I'm like, I wonder if there's a bear out there. So I grabbed my gun out of the closet. I had a closet down in the one room at the bottom of the steps. And it had a gun safe in there. So I grabbed my gun out. I walked out the back door, which was actually, ironically, the door that we used. The front door was kind of sealed off. So we just used that, and there's a pathway in between the house and that shed. So got my light. I got my gun. I'm looking, scanning the yard, scanning the chicken coop. Chickens weren't even really like making any noise or anything. What the heck's going on here? The feed, I would mix the feed in like a steel trash can with a lid. I would get like 3 different types of bags of stuff: corn, pellets, and wild bird seed. And I'd mix that up, and that's what I fed my chickens. I'm like, well, nothing messed with the cane or nothing. The lid's still on it. So I went back in, and eventually I got her to calm down. But it took about an hour and a half for her to actually like stand down. And when she did, she was like, like snorting, like she was frustrated. She should have sensed what I was sensing. Like she was irritated with me and whatever was out there at the same time. She would kind of do that little routine. And that was another thing that just like struck me odd. I didn't see any signs. Nothing was really messed with. I don't know if like they heard her and was like being curious or what, but yeah. So then there was times where I'd be out hunting and I would hear a weird bird sound again. This time it was like something trying to mimic a turkey call to the point where it sounded mechanical, like a rusty barn hinge door, like kind of sound. While I'm out hunting, I'm like,
Dusty, sorry. I apologize real quick. Are you saying that the turkey call sounded rusty, or it was a completely different sound than the turkey call?
Yeah, it sounded like somebody was. It sounded like I knew there was turkeys up there because I would have them come through my yard, and I'd have them across the road from me. You could see them. It'd be like 4 or 5 harems out there, toms and all these hens and the jakes walking around and stuff. I've hunted turkeys and encountered turkeys. Heck, we used to raise them on the farm and release them. But it sounded like something trying to make a turkey call. It sounded mechanical, like a metal rusty barn hinge instead of an actual like turkey call. And it wasn't like somebody was out, some novice hunter was out there trying to make turkey sounds. Because I'm like, well, who's hunting turkeys in deer season? Like, you don't do that. But yeah, it sounded literally like, after it got closer and stuff, it sounded literally like somebody was taking a rusty barn door and opening it up, and the hinges was like, and I'm like, what the heck is this going on? And then the woods would get silent. Like, you wouldn't hear no insects. You wouldn't hear no squirrel activity anymore. No crows calling, nothing. No birds, nothing. It was complete dead silence. Like, and I'm like, whoa. Now, the only time I've ever noticed it gets silent in the woods is when I'm walking to my tree stand, if I'm too loud, or if I have my kids with me and they're walking louder than I do, until after you get settled, after about a half hour, activity will pick back up again and stuff like that. But it was eerily dead silence. And it never got real close. It always stayed off like 40 yards away, 40, 50 yards away, that sound. That was the closest it ever got. But you would hear it a ways away. Like over on the other ridge, like kind of like rolling up through there. It would like, you'd have like a ridge line, and then it would plateau a little bit, and then it would have another ridge line, up like a up climb to another top, and then flatten out for a while, and then it would raise up again. That's how it is up through there on that area. And there's a bunch of old log roads over there too, from back in the early 1900s and stuff, when they were logging out of there. I've actually found old log foundations from like camps where they would have like a supply camp or like a rest camp or whatever for their workers and stuff like that. Maybe like a mess hall type deal. Just the old foundations where it would be like four logs stacked high all the way around, and then I guess they would put like their canvas canopy up, like a canvas pavilion type thing, or enclosed tent, what have you. But yeah, there would be other times where I'd be up there hunting, and I hear squirrels drop down. You can tell, like, I've been hunting all my life, been out in the wilderness all my life, even when I wasn't hunting, just hiking. I love taking in nature, exploring. I love exploring. That's my nature. And there'd be times where, like, you could hear squirrels running around, and I'd be watching them and stuff. And it would sound like something coming in. Either it'd be in front of me, or beside me, or behind me. And then all activity would stop again. And I'm like, what's going on here? And I know there's some black bears around the area. They're pretty scarce, and they don't really come around during the daytime too much, especially near residential areas. They usually wait till the cover of darkness to go and knock over people's bird feeders and eat all that up and stuff like that. I actually had one bear that I chased out of my chicken shed coop area, and that was like sniffing around my feed can, I call it, or feed can, trash can that I had with the lid that I had my feed stored in. I'd come in from work, and bear would go running up through the yard and into the woods. That happened like once or twice, but that was more after my dog got older and wasn't going out quite as much. I guess they sensed, hey, this dog's not out and about, not as active around here, so let's go see what we can see, type of deal. But yeah, so I would play that stuff off a little bit. One time my boys were outside playing, and they're about 8 and 10, maybe give or take a year, maybe a little younger. And I was outside doing stuff, splitting wood for the fire pit and cleaning out the chicken coop and stuff. And I come back out, and they're up in the trees. Climbed up real high, higher than I ever seen them climb. Like, they never really even climbed trees, really. They were adventurous, but they never really climbed trees like that. And I didn't see them at first. I was nervous. I was like, hollering for them. And my oldest boy's like, over here, and kind of like chuckled and laughed. I'm like, oh, what are you doing up there, dude? And he's like, well, where'd he go? I'm like, who? And he's like, the gorilla man. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. He told us how to climb the tree. So we did it. And I'm like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, what? Like, so I'm like, well, come down. And they're like, oh, we're having fun. So I'm like, well, just be careful. Make sure you don't like step on any small branches. Make sure you test them first before you put your weight on them, and always have 3 points of contact. And he's like, I know. And I'm like, went back to like doing my thing, but always looking about at the same time, like leery, like, the gorilla man. Did they see something like I seen years ago? Like, I've never heard them say this before. Like, this was odd. This was strange. I've never heard them say anything like that again or before. So I kind of asked them, I was like, well, what did it look like? And they're like, I don't know, like a gorilla man. And I'm like, are you messing with me? And they're like, no, he was over in the woods. And I was like, what the heck? So I was like, all right. When they got them in, I was like, well, come on down. It's about time for dinner. So I got them inside, and I pulled their mother aside, and I'm like, look, don't ever let them play outside by themselves. At least be on the porch or sitting on the steps or something if you're not tending to the chickens or something like that. Because I was, like, I didn't want them to get snatched up or anything. Like, I don't even know what I would do if something like that happened with my kid. Like, that's my kid, you know what I mean?
Did she also ever have a sighting that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, but I think the boys had something else happen, because there was times where, like, they would ride their bikes down the hill of the yard, and they would ride it around the house and then go back up by the fire pit, and that was like their little syndicate loop or whatever. And there was a couple times where I was like, oh, they're just out riding their bikes, they're cool. And she's like, she had this weird expression on her face that I've never really seen her have before. And she was like, I'll go out and sit with them. Like, okay. But no, not that she'd ever like conveyed to me that, or relayed to me that she ever had any kind of experience or anything. She never really went into the woods too much unless I was like, hey, come check this out. Like, I did show that to her when that corn pile stuff was going on, and she was just like big-eyed looking at me like, what the heck are you talking about, dude? What am I looking at? Like, she I don't know if she was grasping it or if she was surprised or what. Like, but no, she didn't really have anything like that happen. But there was a couple times, there was one time in particular, after you walk into the opening out by my fire pit into the woods, there was like an opening, and it was like kind of clear, but still had some older, tall trees. Now, these trees were at least 60, 70 foot tall. Big, old trees. I mean, big around as a dresser. And there was one right near this stream bed bank where my artesian well was. And it had like a little cubby hole in the root system there. And it was like a little shelf bank that I could actually sit there. And I would hunt there sometimes if I didn't feel like if I didn't feel like doing a lot of walking. And I noticed that nobody, like, none of the kids were out playing up that way too much or whatever. I just would be like, I'll just sit out here for a couple hours, see if there are any deer come moseying down through the trails. Well, I noticed there was this one tree and there's a network of trails that was straight across from where I sat. And this thing was about the size of in between a 2 liter and a 1 liter bottle of soda in diameter. And I had seen it while I was walking trails one day. I would walk trails and go up around and explore and stuff. And well, I did this little like big loop. I went up, found the log road and followed the log road down, and then found the other stream that fed the other side of my yard. And I was like, I followed the stream, and then I came to this fern patch. It was like a big clearing with ferns growing in it. It was kind of like soggy, mushy, spongy type ground there. But there was like a clearing in the canopy where the sun came through, and I guess it was perfect for those ferns. I mean, it was about a half an acre of just ferns there. This is pretty cool. So I kept following that because I knew that was where a stream bed was. To apologize about my dog like yapping. So I walked on the trail, and as soon as I came through like where it got thick again, and then it was like a little more open forest, like hardwoods and maybe some hemlocks. There's a lot of oaks, a lot of white oaks up there. White and red oaks, actually. A lot of poplar trees too. And I found that right beside where this trail comes out of that thick spot, there was this tree that was about, like I said, about the size of in between a 2 liter and a 1 liter bottle of soda. And I had my machete with me, and I'm like, I can see where I sit from here. And I've seen deer coming in and out of here before. So I just took my machete and about shoulder height, knocked the bark off a little bit, facing where I sit, so I can use that as like, all right, there's a nice white, I call them, I used to do tree service with my cousin. He's a licensed arborist, and where you cut a limb off or whatever, we would call it white eyes on the tree, because it's usually white, fresh wood there. So I spun the bark off about the size of a cigarette pack or a cell phone, standard today's size cell phone. Just knocked it a little bit with my machete, just not to dig into the tree, just to chop some of the bark off, scrape it off, and 2 weeks later, I went up, did the same loop around again, because I would walk that style, syndicate-like, if you will, quite regularly. And actually, it's funny because they're at the top of the hill up there. right before you get to the log road, there is this rock outcropping, and it comes up and sticks off the side of the hill to a point, kind of like have you ever seen The Lion King when Rafiki takes baby Simba and holds him up for all the animals to see or whatever?
Oh yeah, like Pride Rock, absolutely.
Yeah. It was kind of like that. Well, me and my sons called it Howler Rock, because that's where the howlers go to howl at night. That was our little inside thing, And when you're standing at the top of it, you're like in the middle of the trees that are downhill from you. You're up there. Like if you look down, you're a good like 20 feet off the ground, but because it's a slope, it becomes higher than everything else to a point. So we called it Howler Rock. But getting back to that tree, so I walked that syndicate again, and I came over because there's a bunch of like intersecting networks of trails, game trails, where the deer, and it was like some highways, man, like constantly used. Like you see where doe and their fawns would go, where the bucks would go, all kinds of rubs and stuff here and there. Different bucks would have different scrapes and rubs, all in this big area that I walked. So I came out of that fern patch and into that thick spot again. And as soon as I got through and I looked over, that tree was literally, if I were to take and stick my arm out at a diagonal upward, snapped over opposite way of where the wind always blows, coming up through that little like ravine area. And I was like, and it was still like connected and attached. And I'm like, I just got this sense, like if it was like a Sasquatch, it was like, what? I didn't do this. How about that? Like type of thing. Like I made it mad, like marking my tree on my trail. What are you doing? Type thing. Like, I'll show you is what I got. I got a sense of immediately when I seen it, because I'm like, what would do this? Nothing. I'm not going to be able to snap something like that. And I'm a pretty active, pretty physically fit guy. I'm not trying to say I'm a He-Man or a muscle man or nothing like that, but I mean, I get paid to lift things up and put them down and all day long, pretty much. You know what I mean? I do construction, and I actually do custom woodworking for the past 15 years or so, or more. But it just blew my mind, and it stayed like that for the longest time. And where it was broken at, wouldn't be like if I were to be able to would be able to snap that tree like that. It's higher than my head. So I was like, what the heck? So a little bit uphill from there, there's times where I was hunting in a tree stand, and I would hear stuff like movement, heavy movement, but never see anything coming up. And it would always stop right where it got thick again. Like it'd be a little bit open, but still tree, like still forest, but it wouldn't be as thick in spots. It'd be big open spots with a lot of trees, forestry, like hardwoods, and then it would get into like brushy type thicket areas and stuff like that. One time I was just scouting around with my scope, and I caught movement. So I panned back over to it out of my other eye. So I panned back over to it, And it literally looked like there was a face looking at me. And I like pulled my head away from the scope, and I'm like, what the heck? Like, shook my head a little bit, probably. I don't know. Rubbed my eyes, something like that. Looked back through. I'm like, well, I see a tree stump there. That was my reference before. But I don't see anything now. And then I'd start scanning around again. And I call it movement again. I looked over and I kind of thought I saw a face again. That gray, like leathery type face. But in the brush, like just where like peeking through like a hole in the brush, like type of thing. Really, really had me feeling weird. And I was like, okay, now either my eyes are playing tricks on me because I've been sitting out here for a couple hours, or I'm actually seeing this. I think I'm actually seeing this because of everything else that has happened leading up to this point so far in my life, you know. And there was some other times where I had like some mineral trace salts I had put by the stream on a board by a root system, and I had seen big indents in the spongy soil where you couldn't really, like, if I were to try and plaster cast something, it wouldn't come up as anything because of how spongy everything is. Like I said, a lot of that soil, it's not really dirt, it's just decomposed tree debris, you know, leaf fall and needles that have fallen off and stuff like that. But there would be times where stuff would get moved, and then I wouldn't be able to find it, and then I'd come back and stuff would be back where it was. There'd be times where I had sat in places on a tree stump hunting, like while I was ground hunting, walking around, and then I'd sit and take a rest for a little while. And then when I went back out again, or just to go out scouting, there'd be like a rock sitting on that tree stump. I'm like, what the heck? I wasn't there when I sat there. I didn't put it there. What's going on here?
How big a rock would it be?
I would say like the size of like the rocks you would build a house with, like stonework.
Wow.
Yeah, like something somebody would put in their stone wall or their chimney or something like that, and it would be like it would still have like some moss on the one side of it or something. So it wasn't like it was completely cleaned off. But then there was other times where I would go out there and there'd be like stuff drug across areas where like it was trying to over the trails, like something was trying to funnel these trails into one bottleneck type thing. And I was like, well, that's pretty odd too. Like nothing but a human or a Sasquatch is going to do something like that. And there's nobody who hunts up here besides me. And I had a neighbor, his son-in-law would hunt, but he wasn't like a traditional hunter. He went straight to his stand or his little pop-up ground blind that he had near his stand area. But he didn't go out like normal times. Like I'd already be out there hunting for hours, and then here it'd be like 8:30, 9 o'clock. Here he's bebopping through the woods louder than a bear, like stomping through the woods, stepping on every stick he could find. It seemed like. I'm like, whoa, dude, what are you doing? Just coming out here and mess up my hunting? Like, why'd you even come out here, dude? Yeah, and there'd be times where, because he would be wearing a lot of orange instead of just like a traditional hat or something like that. But he would always stay close to there'd be Route 30 that comes up through there. It's a 2-lane highway that comes up through the mountain, PA Route 30. And that goes from close to us. It'll go from Gettysburg to Chambersburg and farther. each direction. Like you can go all the way to York with it. You can go, which is the opposite way of Gettysburg or through Gettysburg. You can go all the way to what's it called? Collinsville or whatever. That's way past Chambersburg into the other mountains and stuff. But yeah, I'd see him sometimes. He'd be ever twisting and stretching and stuff, and I'm like, out of his ground blind. I'm like, what the heck is this? This guy ain't much of a hunter. Like, he didn't learn how to hunt like I did, type of thing. Like, you don't want to move when you're hunting, unless you're ground hunting. Then you walk a little bit. Even if you're ground hunting, you walk a few paces, like a few feet, like maybe 10, 20 feet, and you stop. Because you can walk right past the deer if it's bedding down in some thick brush. It'll let you walk past it, but when you stop, the deer will get nervous and be like, oh shoot, it sees me, and it'll jump up and run. Like if you just keep walking, even if you're doing a slow pace, you could walk right past the deer and you wouldn't even know it unless you seen it wiggle its white tail or something like that, or snort it or something.
Is that a guy you ever talked to?
I did talk to him a couple of times. He's kind of an odd fella. He was a bigger fella too. He did mention some things. Like I guess he was kind of scared because I was like, oh yeah, I've seen you had to stand here behind your father-in-law's house. He's like, well, I don't really use that one too much. I use it every once in a while. I put it out there more for him and my wife. He's like, I go over that way, and he like points out to where, like, towards where I used to hunt, but he would always stay close to the road. And I'm like, well, you're not going to have that much activity out by that way. But he's like, because I was like, what do you have much activity out being that close to the road? And he goes, yeah, there's quite a bit of activity. He's like, but he made a comment the one time. He's like, you don't want to go too deep in there. You really don't. And the way he said it and the way his facial expression was while he was shaking his head and looking at me, I'm like, all right, maybe this guy saw something, or maybe he saw a bear, or, maybe he saw something happen out there or whatever, that spooked him to where he stayed close to the road so he wouldn't get lost. I thought he just didn't want to get lost or something too, but yeah, the way he did say that, now that I think about it and you asked, he did make that comment, and the way his facial expressions were, he may have seen something but just didn't like relay it like that, or was trying to say something without saying something.
It sounds like something affected him for sure. Have you ever talked to any of the neighbors around your area?
Right across the road was a bar and restaurant, and I was kind of standoffish about talking about it there for a while, but then after a while you're like hanging around. Like I would work over there too, cooking and stuff, and then like I'd get off around 10 and stuff like that, and there was a couple people I was cool with, mountain men type fellas and stuff like that. They'd been there for a couple hours, so I was like, oh, maybe I can ask them something here and there, and get a real response out of them. But there was a couple people, they kind of just like played it off like, yeah, whatever, dude, there ain't nothing out there. I don't know what you're talking about. I never seen anything. But there was like one or two people that were like, yeah, you always want to let somebody know where you're going. Make sure you got like a GPS or something on you or your phone. And that was like all they would say. They wouldn't like elaborate anymore. Yeah, that was about the most I got out of anybody over there. Now, I used to work in Chambersburg at a warehouse, and I would stop at the Rutter's gas station that was there at the 997 light. It was a fairly new one they built. It was bigger than the other ones. At one point, it actually had one of them automated car washes. I think they got rid of that. I'm not quite sure. It's been a while since I've been up there. I haven't lived up there in like 5 years. And I ran it. I was getting my coffee one morning, and there was a couple rangers in there, and one ranger, he was kind of younger or whatever. And I nodded to him like, "Hey, what's up?" He's like, "Hey, how you doing?" And like after about like the third time seeing him, I was like, "Hey, so where do you work at?" And he told me he was like right in between me and Caledonia at that ranger outpost. And I was like, "Oh, okay." I was like, "Yeah, I go by there a lot." And, I was like, "You guys, what do you do?" He's like, "Well, I usually go up and make sure all the service roads are accessible and, there's no fallen trees and stuff like that. Kind of like a lot of maintenance type stuff. We go out and check things out. If we get reports of like animals and stuff like that." And I'm like, "Oh, yeah?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Have you ever had any reports of Bigfoot?" And he was like stirring his coffee as we're like talking, like he's stirring his cream and sugar in. And he kind of just like stopped stirring and like fish-eyed me, like looked out of the side of his eye at me. And he was like, "I don't know. I don't really answer the phones much." And kind of like just went about stirring his coffee slowly. I was like, "Oh, okay, man. I was just wondering. You ever see anything strange up there while you're up there in the mountains?" He's like, "Oh, well, what isn't strange? You know what I mean?" I was like, "Oh, okay." So I guess he's like you hear a lot of accounts where like rangers will like see or hear things or whatnot, but they don't really comment on it until like years after they retire and stuff. I don't know if it's like some kind of vow of silence they got to take on that stuff or what.
I think there's I think there's an NDA involved, to be honest.
Yeah, something which I could sense by the way he reacted, like he was like, "Dude, you're gonna make me lie to you," like type of reaction, like "No, I never seen nothing in my life," type of like, little bit of that was a little Q&A I got with him. And then I kind of just like didn't want it to be too awkward, so I'm like, "So what all kind of schooling's involved to get into this kind of work and stuff?" Because I was actually interested in doing it, especially in that area. After all this, I was like, "Man, I could do this every day. Like, just go out and scout around and see what I can find. See what's up." There's a lot of gated access roads up there too. That like, there was one right down from my house in between me and Caledonia, and in between me and the ranger post, and they would only have it open like certain months out of the year. But it would take you, it's called Piney Mountain Creek Road. And it'll take you all the way out to like Shippensburg Road, almost like out by the lakes and stuff, out past the lakes and stuff. But it would tie in a couple other, like it was like a gravelly dirt stone road type thing, and they would have throughout. There was like a certain time of year. There was like an annual like enduro motorcycle ride that they would do, and they would ride up 30 and go up through that gated road and go through some of the other connecting roads, like a big syndicate type ride thing. I never got into that. I've ridden motorcycles pretty much all my life too, more dirt bikes than Now that I'm older, I got more street bikes, Harleys and stuff, but I always wanted to, I rode on that road before, but not in that group or whatever. Because I used to ride up and there would be a big, you get up to the top at the one spot where it levels off up at one of the highest points. It plateaus and there's like big industrial high tension power lines coming down through. And I used to love going up there and sitting underneath there and looking up through there and looking down at the bottom of the mountain down towards Fayetteville and just take it in. Like I said, I've always loved nature. Like, even if I wasn't hunting, man, I'd love to go up in the woods and just watch the ferns wake up in the morning, like, because they curl up and close up and stuff during night. And then you go up there and then the sun starts hitting them and they start waking up and just opening up. It's just something awesome to see. Like that's my thing. I just love nature. Always have. And ever since I had my encounters and experiences, it was something I really, really got into. I did have another instance that happened while I was hunting. Couple of times I would go up and I'd be up in my tree stand, and it only happened when I was in my tree stand. Never happened when I was ground hunting, but I'd be up there and it sounded like, I thought my kids, because when I was in my tree stand, my house was down the slope and back of me, behind me. And where my tree stand was only about 200 yards up into the forest. So sound carries and stuff up and through there. Even with the road, the road's not always real noisy. It's only when it's high volume traffic. And I was a little ways away from the road too. Like you could hear it, but not really. It wasn't like loud or deafening or inconveniencing for hunting or nothing. I stayed farther from the road than that neighbor guy did. And it sounded like my kids playing down in where the opening was to come into the woods, like where I would put the corn and stuff. And then I would go down after I was done hunting. And it was weird because the forest would get really silent. No squirrels moving, no birds flying, nothing. And it sounded like my kids was down there playing. And it would last for about 5-10 minutes. And I'd be like looking, seeing if I could see my kids down there, seeing if they were coming up, to see if they wanted to come up in the tree stand or something. I was looking down and didn't see no kids, but I heard them. And then after a while, you would hear like heavy footsteps, bipedal footsteps in the brush, but it was always behind me or off to my side where I couldn't see anything because it was thicker. And I'm like, I'd go down after hunting and I'd be like, were the kids out at all today? And my girl would be like, no, I let the dog out earlier, and I let her back in, but that was it. I was like, the kids didn't go feed the chickens or nothing like that? No, they've been in here watching TV and playing the video games. And I'm like, that's weird because there's no other kids around me and there's definitely no kids in between my tree stand. Like there's nothing in between the tree stand and my house besides the forest. And I've heard, now that I've been watching these other like podcasts, yours and some other people's podcasts, I've heard of that. The natives would even say about it, like, if you hear children in the forest, don't go try and find them. That's the hairy man trying to lure you in or whatever. But yeah, that happened about 4 or 5 times while I was up in that tree stand.
Oh, wow.
Not at the same time, but like different instances, and it would always be like around noon, 1:30, like in between 11:30 and 1:30, it would be when it would happen, and there'd be, like I said, nothing. And sometimes afterwards, you would hear like a crow, an actual crow, and you could see it flying, and then all of a sudden it would sound like there was like a murder of crows flying, but it sounded a little off, but it sounded like a murder of crows, but you didn't see a bunch of crows flying around. You'd see one or two flying around, circling, just gliding and stuff, catching the wind drifts and gliding and stuff, resting their wings. And I'm like, what the heck? Like, this is kind of freaky. Now, I guess we could say I saved the best for last. There was a time where I was hunting. Me and my boys built a ground blind. And there was like an old rotted tree stump. It looked like somebody actually like cut this tree down but never retrieved it. And it just laid there for a while. But then other trees had fallen around it, and they kind of like intersected at one point. But so it was like half rotty with some moss on it, on the tree and the stump, and then the other trees were more fresh, and they kind of intersected and went out like a if it was like a V with the mouth of a V at the tree stump. So I was with my son. I'm like, hey, here's a little thing we're gonna do here. I'm gonna teach you something. You see this here? He's like, yeah. I was like, we're gonna turn that into a ground blind. It's gonna be like a little cubby hole we can hide in, and nothing will see us, but we can see everything that comes through down through these trails. And they're like an intersection of these highway type trails, a lot of activity, multiple trails. And so we built it. We used it for a while. I used it a lot. I actually preferred there, other than my tree stand, because it was less road noise, and also it was more deeper in the forest. It was kind of like in between my tree stand and the fern patch too. I could see that, all that area. And I've had buck walk past me and my buddy while we were squirrel hunting right on a tree. We were sitting on one of them logs at one point, and we just stopped to sit and smoke and chatting. And this buck come walking up the trail, sniffing for a doe. He was on a doe's trail, it seemed. And we were squirrel hunting, so I didn't shoot nothing. But I raised up like I was going to, and he was like, are you going to do that? And I'm like, no. I was like, because karma, man. If I were to shoot that buck, that might be the last buck I ever shoot in my life. He was like, I like the way you think, And he used to be a hunting guide out in Montana. So he was kind of getting nervous, like, dude, I don't want to see you. I don't want to witness you do some illegal right now type thing. But so I was sitting there one time, and I'm guessing it was around 1:30, 2 o'clock. And I started hearing heavy footfall from behind me, where it's really thick at. And it was getting closer. Next thing you know, I started smelling this smell, like a musky type, like kind of like a wet dog and skunk cabbage type smell. And I'm like, that was the first thing that popped in my mind. I'm like, skunk cabbage? I don't have that growing around here that I've noticed. But I'm like, well, might be some back farther in where there's more streams or, soggy areas in the valley parts in between the ridges. So maybe this is the big buck coming up. Because I seen a big buck the year before and didn't get a shot on that one, but I got one that was coming in behind it. It was a little bit smaller. It was like he was teaching that one what to do. But every time that buck would stop, he would stop behind the big tree. It couldn't get a shot on him. All I could see is his antlers and his nose when he would look around and stuff, and his tail, his back haunches and his tail area. They knew what he was doing. They don't get big by being stupid. Yeah, I called him the granddaddy buck. So I'm like, all right, maybe the granddaddy's coming up on me. And then I noticed everything was silent. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like, I don't even hear no birds or nothing. Like, okay. And I had this real static feeling. Like, every hair on my body was standing up. Static. Like, you rubbed a balloon on and held it over you, but, like, magnified times 10. Like, it felt like even my toe hairs were standing up. And I heard this big thud, like, boom, boom, like 2 steps, stomp steps right behind me. And now, mind you, there's this tree stump about the size of a dresser that I'm leaning up against with these tree limbs over top these logs that I'm tucked in. So I got my rifle up in my arm, up on my shoulder, but pointed down to the ground so it doesn't make any glare or shine or anything, hoping this buck would walk up in front of me or beside me or something. And once I heard that boom, boom, I'm like, what the heck? Thinking to myself. And that's when I had the mind speak happen. And I'm telling you, I didn't really catch on to what it was at first. I thought I was just like ADHD and thinking off to myself. But I'm like, then I realized I'm hunting and this is something walking up to me. Like, I wouldn't be doing that. It's because it was like I was asking myself questions and answering them, but in my voice and in another voice. So then it starts getting into, what are you doing? But it wasn't my voice asking the question. It was my voice answering. So the voice, I can kind of replicate it, but not completely, because it was weird. Like, it was kind of like if somebody had like a stiff jaw, but like a drawn out, high and low, whiny voice at the same time. Like, what are you doing now? And I'm like, hunting. What are you doing that for? To feed my family. Why? What did I do? And I'm like, what the heck's going on here? So by this time, I'm like kind of freaking out at the same time. And I thought to myself, I'm like, should I be this scared? And then it answered me in that voice. Not really, should you? So at that time, I'm putting my hand on my pistol that I got in between. Like, I have a cross draw holster in the front. As I shoot a pistol with my left hand. So I have a cross draw holster. The pistol's on my right side, but I had it slung across so that way it was like kind of on my lap. I had my hand on the handle of it and my thumb on the trigger on the hammer. It's a revolver, and here it goes. Well, how are you doing with that? I'm like, it's for protection. I hope I don't have to protect myself. Thinking, like, I'm not speaking out loud. I'm thinking this. And it went on and asked me a few other questions. It's hard to remember some of it. Sometimes it comes back to me, like, just spur out of the middle of nowhere. Like, something will pop in my head, like a something triggers like a flashback or something. And so it asked me a couple things, like what I was doing, why was I there, was I the one leaving the food? And I asked it if it had a family, and it said, yeah, I'm hunting too. And I was like thinking to myself, I hope you're not hunting me. And it even asked me, it said, because I thought to myself, I said, were you the one I seen before? And it said, no, but he was with them. And I'm like, what the heck? So then I got into like asking it with my mind, why can't I see you? And it replied that I could if it felt safe enough. And then it asked me why I wanted to see it and what my intentions were. And I said, I just want to know if I'm going crazy. And it said no. And then I said, I have no intention on harming you or your family. I'm just here hunting for my family like you do for yours. But and then I asked it if it would be upset if I had, how did I say it? If I were to expose it, like, meaning like if I were to like report it and like bring people out there or whatever. And it replied, we sense your intention, but we can't sense others' intentions unless they're here. And if they were ill-intentioned, they would not respond or reveal or something like that. And then I'm like, okay, well, I didn't mean to press. And I didn't mean to intrude. I'm here feeding my family like you. And all of a sudden, it was like I said something wrong or something at one point, right when it stopped. And I heard this, like, if some big guy, now think of the biggest dude that with the deepest voice, like bigger and stronger than Andre the Giant, were to make a sound like, whoa. But it was so guttural and deep and reverberating all at the same time. Like every cell in my body was vibrating. Like it felt like literally like every cell in my body was vibrating, like electric and vibration all at the same time, to where I couldn't even move. And I heard, and I couldn't move. Like I wanted to turn around and look through the little peek hole behind me where I had a little view hole, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even take my hand off. Like I couldn't, if I wanted to, I don't even think I could have cocked the hammer back on that pistol. Like I could not move for literally like a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes. And then it's like my ears started, like I started hearing like a humming crickets, as all these cells are vibrating. And then it's like, it was like, that was what it cut off. It cut off and went away. Like that was its way of doing that. So after about a minute and a half, 2 minutes, I finally was able to like look around, and I like was like, what the heck, was that real? Did that just happen? Did I have a dream? Did I fall asleep out here and have this as a dream? Like, what was this? Did this really just happen? So I looked around, couldn't see nothing. I leaned back and just kind of like took some deep breaths, tried to control my breathing and my heart rate a little bit because it was speeding at this time and I was breathing pretty heavy. And finally, I sat there for about another like 5-10 minutes, got my bearings, like composed myself. And all of a sudden I was like, I don't think anything's going to come through here now. I think it's time to go home before I piss somebody off or feel like I'm overstepped the boundary or something. So I got up and crawled out of the I crawled out of the little cubby blind thing. I looked around. I even stood up and I was like looking. Now you could see where there was like leaves rustled up as like something came in and left, like turned around and went back out, because you could see where like leaves were standing up. This was during like the fall time, end of fall, winter. You could see where the leaves were like disturbed. They were, tufted up from a disturbance of some sort, going right into that thick spot, which was just a little uphill from where that tree got snapped that I knocked that bark off of. And I was like, okay. So that was pretty wild. Then that was that.
Do you feel that the when it made the noise at the end, did you hear that inside your mind, or was that out in the open?
No, that was out. That was outright in the open.
Oh, that's wild.
Whoa!
Yeah.
Like a roar and a whoa all at the same time. Like if a gorilla and a lion and the biggest dude you ever met with the deepest voice made this sound all at the same time. There was something else with a vibration in there. It was wild. I literally, like I said, I was paralyzed. Like it felt like every cell in my body was vibrating. It felt like my toenails were vibrating, like just reverberated vibration, like my every cell in my body was a tuning fork vibrating, is what it felt like. It was unreal, completely unreal. I've never in my life. I've worked around loud noises, been at concerts right by the amplifiers. Like that doesn't even touch what I felt like. You know how like if you're around heavy music or heavy bass and stuff, you can feel bass in your chest and stuff like that. This was completely on a whole nother level from that. That was that times 1,000, where every cell in my body was vibrating. My hairs on my arms and every hair on my body was standing up, vibrating. It felt like too, like my skin was vibrant. Like it was wild, man. Yeah, that was definitely something you can't ever forget. Something like that, like, and I don't even think, other than having another experience like that, you could even replicate it.
Yeah, it almost sounds like you were involved with almost like a infrasound experience. I mean, just the fact you couldn't move and vibration, just very, very interesting.
Yeah, it was very wild. And I ended up losing my chickens. I thought it was like a family of foxes or coyotes taking my chickens. Because like I said, I used to let them free range, and then it got to the point where they would just let themselves back in and go up in their roost box. And so I got working different shifts. I was doing different shifts at the time. So it was harder I would open up the chicken pen, but others that I lived, like my family that I lived with, my girl, my kids, they wouldn't always shut the thing. So then I was like, well, screw it. They just come and go as they want now. They're still getting plenty of eggs and they haven't been harmed or anything. Well, then they started, and they didn't really go into the woods. They would go maybe across the little stream into a little bit and rough up some pine needles and scratch around underneath the raspberry bushes and stuff near at the edge. But they didn't really go into the woods. But then it got to the point where they were kind of like disappearing. And then I would find just a bunch of feathers, like something grabbed a hold of a chicken and just like scooped it up by its neck and went like them. You ever see them things for like New Year's that you hold the little peg stick and you like spin it and it clicks and makes that noise with the mechanism or whatever? Mm-hmm. It was like something like grabbed up a chicken by its neck and went like that and walked off with it. And there'd just be like a debris field of plumage, like a 10-foot circle, 8-foot circle. I'm like, what the heck? Like, that's a little big and extreme for like a coyote or a fox. And usually they grab them and take off with them. You know what I mean? You might find a bunch of feathers, but not like that wide of a debris field. So then I must have startled one while it was grabbing my chickens because it left the chicken there, but its neck was broke. But there wasn't no like bite marks because I was inspecting it. So I'm checking it out and its neck's broke. Like the chicken's stiff, but where the neck's broke, got this slinky neck going on. So I was like, what the heck? There ain't even no bite marks or nothing. So I'm looking at it. So I had this bright idea of going over to the clearing area. I was like, well, animals are used to me feeding over by this corn spot. So I went over to that clearing area and in between that and my fire pit, there was like a little thick brushy like spot. So I put up a camping chair, like one of them umbrella chairs, and had me a little setup there. And I took that chicken and I cut its neck open and down its breast a little bit so that way it would let blood out, and I hung it up in a tree over in that opening in the woods. So I sat there at dark and nothing really happened. I started playing some game calls, like distress calls and some coyote calls and stuff like that. And nothing really happened. And I was just about to give up. Now I was out there for like 2 hours. I was about to give up. I had this light. I had a flashlight that I put a red lens on so it wouldn't cast a beam, but it would illuminate an area, probably about a 15-foot circle that it illuminated by this chicken. Then I heard like this heavy footsteps. But off in the distance, before I heard the heavy footsteps, I heard like some stuff like sound like branches breaking. And I'm like, oh, all right, something's coming. Like, see what's happening here. But it wouldn't come into the light. It would only stay on the outside of the light. And it would where the down tree log was, and there was some brush that I cleared out of the clearing, and piled up there a while back ago. I came through there and came, I'm going to say that's left of where I'm sitting there looking at this chicken. And I'm looking up the hill, and it would go from left to right outside the edge of the light. And you could see eye shine. Then you could see two eye shines. And it was about shoulder height to me if I was standing. So it was like something was like creep walking, like knees bent, like creep walking, trying to like walk back and forth. But then it became two of them. Now the eye shine, I've never seen eye shine like this before. I've seen deer eye shine. I've seen coyote eye shine. I've seen pretty much every animal up there's eye shine. The only one I haven't seen is probably porcupine, but porcupines aren't that tall. This was like a red, amber colored eye shine. And it would just go from left to right, or right to left, right to left. And then when the second one appeared on the left while the other one was all the way on the right. And then the one would go away and the other one would come back over this to the left and then stop like halfway, and that one would disappear. And the one on the far left would come back again, and then the other one would come back and appear far right. So then it was like one was like standing there stationary and ducking away, as the other one was like testing the waters, like seeing what was going to happen. And I just thought to myself, I'm like hoping maybe I could get that mind speak thing to happen again or something, which I'm sure they can sense, or after all that, they can definitely sense what's going on. So I spoke in my head to myself. I'm like, if you're the ones taking my chickens, might as well just go ahead and take it. If it's you, I won't shoot it. But if you don't show me, I'm going to shoot. So nothing, no mind speak happened again or nothing like that. But all the crickets and stuff stopped chirping out in the woods. All the insects, frogs, all that stuff got quiet. And the eyes like double blinked and went away. And then I heard heavy footsteps going back up into the mountain. So I'm like, maybe that was their way of saying, hey, we've been doing it, but you're holding that gun, so we don't trust you to hold that word or whatnot. But yeah, I never had that mind speak happen again. That one time was the only time. I mean, and it was pretty wild. But the weird thing is that chicken never disappeared. I left that chicken there. That thing hung there for over a month.
Really?
Like the
flies
that's weird. Okay. The flies wouldn't even eat it or nothing. It was weird. I was like, what the heck? And I heard weird owl calls, like, because I used to hoot the owls then. I've done that ever since I was little, growing up on the farm. And I used to love doing it. Like I would show it to the boys. We'd have them fly from the mountain into right above our campfire. And then then it would realize it's us hooting it. And then it would get quiet and just watch us for a little while. You'd see it float down across the road over to the other mountain ridge and stuff, like other wood line and stuff. But yeah, that was really weird about that chicken. Nothing touched it. I ended up getting fed up with it, and after about a month or so, and cut it down and threw it in the bonfire, because I'm like, well, that was a waste. Like, You killed the thing. Now you don't even touch it. Nothing else will touch it. What's going on here? But there's a few other little like things like when I was hooting owls, and you could tell there was an owl hooting back, but then like off to an other directions distance, something would try and mimic it, but not sound exactly like it. Like you could tell something was a little off, like a little too deep, a little too fast, out of rhythm. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've had go on and what I've experienced and stuff. And this is really like, other than after I got warmed up to my soon-to-be wife and stuff, this is, and my parents and maybe like one or two other people. This is the first I really like talked about it. It's actually the first I've ever talked about it in depth and with everything all at once. Like, because I say some stuff and people kind of, oh yeah, whatever. You must have been drinking or smoking that night or something like that, And I'm like, no, for real. Like this stuff's for real. Like, what do I have to gain by making this up? You know what I mean?
Exactly. And thank you for trusting, this platform enough to share publicly what you've experienced over the years. You've had, some really interesting things have happened, some very intense things.
Yeah. I actually plan to go out there. I actually made it as part of my New Year's resolution. Like this year, I'm going to get back into going up on that up into those forest areas and just going out and like doing a little bit of camping and stuff overnight or on the weekend or something, just to see what I can come up with, or see, because I don't have like no high tech gadgetry or anything like that. I'm a working man that's got a family that I've been paying for ever since I had my oldest boy 15 years ago. So I got 3 kids now, so it's not like I can go spend a couple grand on a camera or some fancy like recorder device or anything like that. I try to look for stuff at auctions and yard sales and stuff, but half the time that stuff's broken anyway, so or somebody outbids you.
Well, Dusty, I would say, definitely, if you do end up going back out and, if things do continue to happen, definitely keep us in the loop with, any future things that happen
Definitely.
in your life as well. But thank you for sharing tonight and for coming on the show. I'm sure there'll be some people that'll find some things they can relate to that are from the area. Usually that's how it works out, and we'll probably see some interesting offshoots from this one as well.
That'd be great. Maybe somebody had some similar instances or something. I'd love to hear those as well. Like, I don't know, ever since the first time that very first time, I've been like, I've always believed in it to begin with, but once I actually saw something and I was like that first sighting, that thing, like if I were to describe it, what it looked like that very first time. Have you ever seen the movie Land of the Lost with Will Ferrell in it?
Yeah. I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
Dude, it looked like a 7-foot chaka.
Oh man, that's awesome.
Like, I swear, like I was like, and that image, like when I saw it, that immediately snapped into my mind. I was like, what the?
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was weird, but yeah, there's definitely like families. They're definitely moving around in like family type things. Just from the senses that I got and from trying to track it down that time and everything, I could definitely say they move in families. They they live in families and migrate. I don't know if they necessarily migrate in that area because it's pretty plentiful even in the winter scenarios, but I've heard about them migrating up and down the Appalachian Trail and following the power line cut throughs and stuff like that. And that's both of those are right in that, come right through that national forest. So if they migrate, they migrate. If they just hang out there, who knows? Because there's so many outcroppings and stuff where they could find shelter to get through the winter as well. So, yeah, I'd love to get out there and boots on the ground again.
Well, Dusty, I have a feeling that you will soon enough. But I just want to say thank you for coming on the show and definitely keep us informed with what happens when you are able to get boots on the ground again.
Definitely will do. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thanks for listening.
Just want to take a few minutes to say thank you to you, all my listeners, for listening to the podcast. Please take a minute to help out the show by subscribing on YouTube, making sure you hit the bell so you don't miss any notifications, and share the episode on YouTube with a friend. Also, if you're listening to us on a podcast, thank you so much. Make sure that you're subscribed, share the show with a friend. Really, it's all about sharing the show wherever you can. If you've had a Bigfoot encounter related to the following or know someone who has, please reach out to me at bigfootsociety@gmail.com or pass on my email. Here's a list: the Subtle Lake area of Oregon, Rainbow, Oregon, McKenzie Bridge area, Sweet Home, pretty much that entire area, the north part, if you get what I mean. I'll see you back next time, listeners. Sasquatch Summerfest this year, July 11th through the 12th. It's going to be fantastic. July 11th through 12th in Green Waters Park in Oak Ridge, Oregon. And listeners, if you're going to go, you can get a 2-day ticket for the cost of one if you use the code BFS, like Bigfoot Society, but BFS, and it'll get you some off your cost. Priscilla was nice enough to provide that for my listeners. So there you go. I look forward to seeing you there. So make sure you head over to www.sasquatchsummerfest.com and pick up your tickets today.